Suez Crisis, 1956. How America financially crushed Britain, August 1956. For over 80 years, a 193-kilometer ditch in the sand was the lifeline of the British Empire. It was the shortcut for two-thirds of Europe's oil, the indispensable link to Asia, and the final defiant symbol of European global dominance. But on the dusty banks of Alexandria, an upstart young colonel was about to light a fuse that would scorch the map of the 20th century. When Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser seized the Suez Canal, he wasn't just nationalizing a company. He was delivering a direct terminal challenge to the old world order. Britain, France, and Israel saw this as an unforgivable insult, a crime that demanded a bloody military response. But the resulting crisis would not save their empires. It would prove decisively that the age of gunboat diplomacy was dead. The Suez Crisis was the watershed moment, the very point where the European imperial powers were forced to confront the most humiliating truth. They were no longer in charge. The strategic importance of the canal cannot be overstated. It shaved 8,900 kilometers off the Europe-Asia route. For Britain and France, it was not merely commercial, it was a psychological dependency. The Suez Canal Company was controlled by their financial interests, serving as a constant reminder of their colonial mastery in the Middle East. Nasser, a charismatic leader of the 1952 Egyptian Revolution, embodied the rising tide of Arab nationalism. He sought to purge the Middle East of Western influence and had ambitious plans, notably the Aswan Dam. When the US and Britain, angered by Nasser's arms deals with the Soviet bloc, suddenly reneged on their funding for the dam, it was the ultimate provocation. On July 26, 1956, Nasser stood before a massive crowd in Alexandria and made his declaration: the Suez Canal Company was nationalized. He promised the canal's estimated $35 million annual revenue would fund the dam. British Prime Minister Anthony Eden, comparing Nasser to Mussolini, saw military action as the only path. This ideological fury masked the deep fear. If Nasser succeeded, the rest of the empire would crumble. The next move was one of the most sordid chapters in post-war diplomacy. Britain, France, and Israel, despite their vastly different long-term interests, conspired to launch a coordinated attack. Israel's primary motive was security, ending raids by Fedayeen guerrillas and breaking Nasser's naval blockade of the Straits of Tiran. France was motivated by colonial revenge, furious at Nasser's support for the Algerian independence movement. The secret negotiations took place at a villa in Sèvres, near Paris. The resulting Protocol of Sèvres was a meticulously planned deception. The plan was cynical. Israel strikes first across the Sinai. Then, Britain and France would issue a self-serving ultimatum, calling on both sides to retreat from the canal zone. When Nasser predictably refused this ultimatum, since it would mean accepting foreign reoccupation, Britain and France would launch Operation Musketeer, seizing the canal under the pretense of separating combatants and protecting the vital waterway. This clandestine pact was the final desperate gasp of imperial power, based entirely on a foundation of lies. The military campaign began flawlessly on October 29, 1956, with Israeli forces sweeping through the Sinai. On October 31st, British and French bombing commenced, followed by paratrooper landings at Port Said and Port Fouad. Militarily, the success was swift. However, the political shockwave was global. The reaction was not led by the world's opposition, but by America's fury. President Dwight D. Eisenhower was incandescent that his allies had betrayed the Western alliance and acted without consultation. This invasion threatened to push the entire Arab world directly into the arms of the Soviet Union. The condemnation from Washington was public and immediate. But Eisenhower's true weapon was not diplomacy, it was the US dollar. The American action was multifaceted and economically devastating. 1. IMF blockade. The U.S. immediately threatened to block Britain's access to vital International Monetary Fund (IMF) loans. Britain, grappling with the cost of empire and the post-war economy, desperately needed this liquidity. 2. The pound's collapse. Crucially, the US Treasury began discussing selling off its massive holdings of British government bonds. This was the financial nuclear option. Such a sale would have instantly destroyed the British pound sterling's value, rendering the nation economically bankrupt and triggering a total financial collapse. This aggressive financial diplomacy demonstrated a new, harsh reality. Military might was now subservient to economic power. Britain could not fight a war or even stabilize its currency without Washington's direct permission. The Soviet Union, seeing its opportunity, added to the pressure. Premier Khrushchev issued dramatic, albeit likely hollow, threats of nuclear missile strikes against London and Paris, positioning the USSR as the protector of the developing world. Under this overwhelming economic and military pressure, Britain and France were forced into a humiliating retreat. They agreed to a ceasefire on November 6th. The subsequent withdrawal was overseen by a historic new force. The United Nations played a key transformative role. Canadian Foreign Minister Lester B. Pearson stepped forward with a revolutionary proposal: the creation of the first international peacekeeping force. This was the United Nations Emergency Force, UNEF. Before this moment, UN resolutions focused on condemnation. UNEF changed the game. The humiliating withdrawal destroyed careers and shattered illusions. Anthony Eden, broken by the betrayal and the crisis, resigned in January 1957. The crisis also convinced France of the need for independent nuclear power and paved the way for Charles de Gaulle's return. For the Arab world, the Suez Crisis was a stunning moral and political victory. Nasser emerged as a regional hero, inspiring nationalist movements across Africa and Asia. The episode definitively accelerated the pace of decolonization. The power vacuum left by Britain and France was not absorbed by Egypt, but by the superpowers. The U.S., by condemning its allies, gained crucial credibility in the Middle East. President Eisenhower formalized America's new dominance with the Eisenhower Doctrine in 1957, committing the U.S. to providing military and economic aid to the region. The Suez Crisis was the final, definitive moment when the old world of European empires yielded to the new bipolar order. It demonstrated that the age of imperial intervention was over, replaced by a complex reality where American financial diplomacy, Soviet threat, and the legitimacy of the United Nations held the true global power. For more compromise-free history that challenges the official narrative, make sure you subscribe to The Fat Historian. Comment below. Do you think Britain could have defied the American financial pressure if they had found an alternative source of funding?